Today's guest, Cole Kushner. He found himself sleeping on floors and living the struggling musician life while he realized that he needed a different path. So Cole decided to go back to school for music, even though he couldn't read musical notation at the time. And that bold decision, combined with his discovery that he loved writing about and analyzing music more than performing it, led Cole to eventually create Dissect, which is a groundbreaking long form musical analysis podcast that breaks down influential albums track by track.
We didn't tour a bunch, but we did these like weekend kind of trips where we would try to book like a few shows out of town and kind of hit it Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or whatever the case may be. And we went one particular trip to San Diego, and all three of my band members just got fucking trashed afterwards, just wasted. And we were sleeping on someone's floor. And I just remember being the only sober one there. Like I would drink occasionally, but I would never get belligerent or anything like that. And I was just felt like a babysitter, and I was sleeping on the floor. We probably eaten like whatever shit fast food that night. I was just like, nope, this ain't it. I can't handle even a couple more years of this. It was, that was definitely the moment I love those guys, still love them, still talk to them, everything like that. But it was just like with me working harder than everyone else and paired with, the lifestyle of, essentially making no money, and living in closets and all these things that I look back and think like, oh, those are kind of sacrifices that I was making to pursue this larger goal. It just became for me like I got continually worried about relying on other people for my own success, which is kind of a double-edged sword in terms of like you do need other people for pretty much anything that you do to be successful, but when you're so reliant on them, in particular being in a band or anything creative, it's like it became whereas like as business partners would these be my business partners? Like no way in hell. And so that combined with me wanting to go back to school and keep getting better at music and study music formally, and also I think I'd gotten married right around that time too, so it was like a culmination of things that came like, yeah, the band thing's probably not for me anymore.
You were also probably like pretending with your parents like everything was fine, right? They go, how are you doing? Go, everything is great. Meanwhile, Taco Bell was sitting on the floor making no money.
Yes, but I mean,
everything they said was going to happen ended up happening.
Right? Yeah, right. No, I mean, they were really supportive. They would come to my shows, everything like that, and ironically, I'd still look back at that band and think, yeah, if we would have kept going, we probably would have done something. The band was good. The last show we played was our biggest show we had, and we played with a nationally touring act, and which made it, well, I wouldn't say it made it more difficult to leave. I was ready to leave no matter what. But it wasn't like I was leaving nothing, right? Like I do feel like we had potential to do something, whether that was a sustaining career or not. Like I do believe we could have went somewhere with it, but life happened and I moved on.
Okay. All right. So you end up going to Cal State Sacramento, but sounds like you were broke. So I don't know how you ended up paying for that. And you said you faked your way into the music program. So what exactly does that mean?
Yeah. So at that point, I'd played music for over, I'd say almost 15 years ish, but I was self-taught. I think I took like 1 or 2 lessons when I was, part of me getting a guitar for my 13th birthday was I had to take lessons, and that lasted a couple of weeks. And I was like, I just wanted to be Jimi Hendrix, and my guitar teacher was like a flamenco guitar player. That's not what I'm doing here. But, and I was only self-taught, I could see notes, I know what music notes were, but I didn't know how to read them. Mm-hmm. And so, as I started to think about like, how am I going to progress as a musician? I felt like I had maxed out on my own kind of self-knowledge. Like I knew some theory. I didn't really know how to read music. Like I couldn't sit down at a piano and just play a piece reading it. And so I was like, oh, yeah, I need formal education. And so in preparation of thinking about going to college, I kind of like started to look at, oh, hey, how do I read music a little bit better? But yeah, so you have to audition to get into the composition program at most colleges. And so I ended up, so you have to audition, but as a composer, you can't really audition. So you audition as a performer first, and then you end up majoring in composition, but you also have to play an instrument. So I played piano. And so I tried out, my audition was a piece that I wrote, which kind of masked the fact that I didn't really know how to read music. And so I got into the program on a piece that I wrote, and then realized, very shortly after that I was just totally, totally out of my depth. It was the experience of like knowing how far I was behind. Cause when you don't know, you don't know, like you don't know what you don't know. And there was this whole other world of like, I realized like all these musicians that I'm suddenly, in school with and classes with have been playing music formally for like since, junior high, and when they started playing saxophone and then took lessons and was in band through high school, and I had just no experience whatsoever with any of it. And so, yeah, me sneaking my way into the program was like getting in and realizing what the program actually was like an entirely different thing that I can tell you some horror stories about. But that's how I got in, was like playing a composition that I wrote myself, that so masked me not knowing how to read music.
And there was no reading music 101 class because everyone should have already
Oh yeah,
been reading music by the time you get there.
The lowest music theory course was like an advanced. It's an advanced course. It's not like here's the note A and here's like, you know what I mean? It's like not that at all. So I was starting at 0 pretty much, and everyone else was at like 7 or whatever.
So let me ask you this: if you don't know how to play music by ear, right? And let's say like I don't know how to play. I can't read music. I've never really played an instrument seriously. Would you and I be at the same level? Or the fact that you could actually play instruments, would you be a little bit, would you find that a little bit less challenging to go to a music school where everyone already knows everything?
Yeah. I mean, I was a good piano player, and I was a good guitar player, and you learn, I mean, it's not like I was totally naive. Like I didn't know what chords were, or like some music theory, and you know what I mean? Like you could just pick that up by learning other people's songs and be like, oh, I see why this works, and I see why this, you know what I mean? You kind of just tackle, so I did know some things. I don't want to be totally like, I was just like,
yeah, of course.
But, in terms of like, that's way different than like formal training, where you're learning, physical techniques, not only how to play your instrument, but also sight reading. And that was the biggest hindrance for me, was just like, seeing what the notes that are on the page and then playing them on the piano. It was like being where everyone else was fluent in a language, I was not fluent in a language. Where I was like looking at the dictionary to find the word for whatever Spanish word you're trying to say. That was me, like looking at the note on the page and then finding on my keyboard. Was just not, because there's a huge disconnect there.
Yeah, I was just thinking that because I'm learning Spanish right now and I'm translating 3 times in my head. I hear it, I translate it to English, and then I think about the Spanish and the response, right? And then I have to translate it from English to the Spanish response and then speak it all within like half a second. And it's like you just,
yeah, exactly. That was exactly me at the piano trying to read music.
What was the tuition situation?
I took out student loans.
Okay.
Pretty much that. And then me and my wife moved in with her mom. My wife went to nursing school while I was going to music school. And so we didn't have rent to pay, which was a huge blessing. I didn't have to work for the majority of the time I was in college.
Still humbling though, right? Like moving into your wife's mom's place.
Yeah. No, yeah.
20s.
No, yeah, definitely. Definitely. It's what I was pretty determined that what I was doing was right. the right decision. I didn't feel like I made a mistake.
Was this feeling you're describing now, it sounds like you kind of knew that this was your path, right? Was that the first time you felt that in your life? Or had you felt that before and it was like a familiarity when you felt it again? And that made you sort of work harder and take those extra classes to learn how to read music and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think everything that I've ever decided to do felt like the right thing in the moment.
Mhm.
And I tried to execute that thing as if that were the truth. You know what I mean? When I was in a band, that was that felt right, and that's why I pursued it at that time. I think as everyone knows, as you get older or just life evolves, like things change and motives change and all that, and you kind of have to be adaptive while still staying true to that feeling. And the feeling that I was getting with the band was like, this is not right for me now. And the feeling that I got with, yeah, in theory, pursuing music formally was the feeling like that's what I wanted to do. And it felt right when I did it, even though like it was extremely challenging and I almost dropped out because of all the factors of me being so underdeveloped. It's still, I didn't drop out. Like it still felt like this is what I need to be doing. And so that once I committed to that, it was like, I'm going to do everything that I can to make this to be successful. And so you kind of alluded to, I took the way that I was kind of able to make up my education that I was lacking was I would take the 18 units required as a music major. And then on the side, I found these, what are called the great courses, which they still have them. But they're essentially like uh, college level courses that you could take. You didn't get credits for them or anything, but they are college level courses taught by renowned professors from across the country. And I found this really great professor, Dr. Greenberg, who had all these courses on music. And so I downloaded, bootlegged all of the courses, downloaded them, and just took all the courses that was offered. And it was all for, introduction. It was all for like non-musicians. A lot of them were non-musicians. So it was like the perfect level for me because it was all the theory stuff was explained in a way that, my mom could understand. It was meant to be accessible to non-musicians. And so for my position, it was great because it wasn't technical or the technical parts were explained in a way that, everyone could understand. And so I was taking all those courses on the side while I was taking the actual courses at college. And I did that for about 2 years. And by the second or third year, I felt um, comparable. I wasn't excelling as a musician, but I started to excel at the education part of it. I started to excel at the essay writing about music. I started to excel about some of the theoretical stuff. I never became what I would feel like comfortable comparing myself to the pianist that I was, playing alongside during college.
Right.
Those people were on a whole nother level, musicianship wise, in terms of playing their instrument. I never got to that level, but I really started to excel in the more academic part of music. What eventually led me to do Dissect. But
Well, this is also the first time you guys were dissecting songs and getting context based on people's personal lives and the time they wrote this piece and the place where they played the piece. So you do a great job of breaking all this down in your TED Talk. But for the listener who hasn't seen your TED Talk, can you just give us like an idea of what that would look like in a typical, with a song, a Beethoven song or something that you guys would study?
yeah, you would just, like any class of any subject, you'd have these more kind of open prompts of, writing essays. And, in music, it was, could be a Beethoven piece. I remember I wrote a piece on Dmitri Shostakovich, one of my favorite composers. And yeah, if you wrote a piece about, whatever, pick a piece, you'd have to research. You can analyze just the music, but what I discovered through college was like you would learn so much about the music by learning about the composer and the time that the composer was living in, what was happening during that time, where they were living, the things that were going on in their environment, personal life, like researching all of that ended up paying dividends into the analysis of the composition. And you can really give the context of a piece through the context of the artist's life and the time they're living. I really started to love that process. I was always the person that began the essay the moment that they were assigned it. I wasn't waiting, procrastinating. Like I realized a lot of my, people are going to school with would procrastinate. That, I'd be like halfway done with mine and they hadn't even started. And I remember thinking back and being like, or just kind of realizing in the moment that I was a little bit unique in that way. And I really doing this thing that other people didn't seem to love so much. But yeah, I felt like it made me a better musician than a better composer. Because I kind of learned how to incorporate things larger than myself into the compositions, by studying how other composers did that. I also learned how art could be a reflection of culture and society, where it's like you can learn something about more than the composition through the composition. You can learn, Dmitri Shostakovich, who was composing under Stalin's rule. I learned so much about USSR, Russia, and, all that through the compositions of Shostakovich, because he was living during that time and he was having interactions with Stalin and all this stuff. And I just really loved how it could be kind of the composition can be a wormhole into history and what you can learn about society, history, but also just what it means to be human. I mean, that's really the underlying foundation of all art, is like translating human experience into something creative. And so what I'm always trying to get at, what I learned to get at was like, yeah, what are the human truths in this great piece of art, which is one reason why art stands the test of time, I believe, is that because they have those truths in them. I really just got addicted to that kind of uncovering process, because I just felt like I was learning so much just personally about myself through these artworks that were composed like 200 years ago. It's like, that's weird. But it was like, why? Well, we're human. We're all human. It's just sharing different human experiences that have this underlying kind of universal principles to them. I just really loved that about analyzing music.
Hey, so a lot of you all have been reaching out with your guest suggestions. And look, I appreciate it. I do. And to help make it easier for those guests to say yes to my invitation, I need you to subscribe to this channel. Just hit the subscribe button below, and that's literally the best way to help me get you that guest on my podcast. All right. Thank you so much for helping out, and back to the show.
I heard the movie producer Brian Grazer, I think Ari Emanuel, the head of WME, talked about this too, about how they had dyslexia. And obviously no kid wants to be trying to read with dyslexia because you can't read. So they had to come up with workarounds, which helped them become sort of basically hustlers, like learn how to make things happen, through association or through networking or whatever, which then served them really well in their careers. And I used to teach yoga, and I joked that I was the stiffest yoga teacher in Los Angeles. I could barely touch my toes, but it turned out to be a unique advantage because it allowed me to really hone in on articulation and not rely on demonstration. And I'm wondering, in your case, not being able to read music initially and then having to go and study extra, looking back now, was that in some way a unique advantage for you as well?
I think so. Yeah. I think so. Maybe at the time it didn't feel like that.
No, of course not.
Yeah, just because insecurities and, stress and all that. But
And you were also older too. So you had, you said,
Yeah.
you mentioned that you would be excited about these essays. I'm sure the kids who were 19 and 20 were like, yeah, whatever, I got to go party first. But you were very focused. You were married. You're serious.
yeah, I think that was definitely part of me working hard. I felt like I did outwork most people. But yeah, I think that had to do with me like being older putting myself on the line to do this definitely forced me. Yeah, but it's an interesting question in terms of like your deficiencies being an advantage. I definitely think that they can. I think in my experience, I'm just trying to think of it exactly how that manifested itself, because I do think it played a part. It might just be me like overcompensating. That could be one component of it, right? Like I'm deficient in these things, so I'm going to overcompensate. In the things that I can thrive in, I'm going to really thrive in, which I think was a big part of it. Because I wasn't thriving so much in the actual playing of the instruments. I was just at too many years of a disadvantage there, where it felt almost hopeless to try to catch up in that way.
Mhm.
And so, I think part of me really excelling in the academic side of things was, that was an area that I felt like my deficiencies weren't a problem. And I loved it. I genuinely fell in love with it. And so, I do think that definitely had some motivation there. I mean, we generally, when we find success in something, it feels good, right? So we're naturally kind of incentivized to keep pursuing it. Definitely think that was part of me. Ended up excelling in the academic portion for sure.
So those essays you would get high marks on, even though you were playing catch up in the rest of the curriculum.
Yeah. I'd always get like, the teachers would make it a point to be like, this is really good. Like I had a few of those where they took the time to be like, you're doing above and beyond the
Exceptional.
Yeah. So that was always even before, when I was not going to music, the first time I went to college, like that was always the case too. Different subjects and stuff, but the essay writing was always something that I ended up just excelling at for whatever reason. My professors always kind of noted that like, you're pretty good at this.
Okay, so you graduate 2015. Gonna go be a maestro somewhere. Or what was the plan, man? You just worked your ass off
Yeah.
getting this music degree, and you end up at a coffee shop.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened. It was a debate between continuing school, which was master's, a PhD was like really the only track as a music major. If you're not playing and if you're not an active player, and even even there, it's really tough. And I was not good enough at my instrument to be a professional player. So really only, and I was getting pretty good at composing. What we didn't talk about so much was that I was a composition major. So I was writing pieces. I was learning how to write pieces for orchestra, for different, ensembles, and was really, really like that. Although I wasn't as good as I was at essay writing, the academic stuff, that was always the strongest. But so it was after I graduated, it was, do I want to go back to school? Do I want to go back to school for like probably 6 more years, maybe 5? And at that point I was 28 or however old I was. And it was like somewhat daunting, to
What
commit.
about getting the band back together? I mean, you're a better songwriter now, right? You studied composition.
Yeah, that could have been an option. Even to this day, I'm like not interested at all in that.
You're on start.
I mean, I started my first band, I was in high school, and then I was ever since. So I'd done that for like over 10 years at that point, like maxed myself out, I think. And relying on other people was always scary, to be honest. Going back to that was scary. But yeah, it was a debate. I kind of I got a job at a coffee shop, to just kind of buy time, to be honest. But then ended up falling in love with coffee. And that sent me on a whole other kind of wormhole of education and experience.
Was it nepotism? You saw an ad in Craigslist. Like, how did you get this job at the coffee shop?
Well, I fell in love with coffee in college. I'd go to coffee shops to write or do whatever, and really fell in love with coffee as a consumer, and really geeked out on, at that point, like what I could in terms of self-education. I was buying beans and studying the flavors, and then I started reading about like the history of coffee, like anything that I ended up just obsessing on for a while. And then I was like, oh, I'll just get a job at this coffee shop that I've been going to, that I really respected and was doing really well, locally. And, yeah, so
I've been to Temple before.
okay. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Where
My
you from?
dad lives in Sacramento, so
Oh, cool.
I would go visit. I've visited him a few times, looking for a place to write or
Yeah.
whatever. So I found myself in Temple one day.
Oh, cool. Yeah, yeah. So I worked for them for 5 years.
Mhm.
Yeah, I ended up just not going back to college. It just felt too daunting at that point.
Now, did that feel like, okay, so, it sounds like you had a pretty decent job there and you're doing all these interesting things, teaching coffee classes, et cetera. But did it, in the back of your mind, did it feel like you were settling, or did it feel like you were just incubating until the next thing kind of presented itself that felt the same way going to music school felt?
Yeah, I think I genuinely fell in love with coffee, and I had kind of resigned myself to thinking that it could be a career path that I would be satisfied with. At that time, it felt like that. Um, I think looking back, it probably would have ran its course. I think I would have probably maxed out with that if I did it too long. Um, but yeah, there was always when I got out of college, I had a job at the coffee shop, and then I was making music still. I self-released an album that I did all my own. Produced, mixed, mastered, everything start to finish was me. So I was still like
Alternative rock, or what was the genre?
it was like electronic music combined with classical music was the idea.
Okay.
I was trying to fuse those two elements together. Not like
Mhm.
dance electronic, but more like ambient electronic, some hip hop influence, drums and stuff. So that was like, that was mostly me. Like I wasn't trying to make it. I never played a show.
Mhm.
But it was just my kind of creative outlet at the time. And then that kind of ended. I was still making music, but it wasn't, I was doing it less. And I just had a kid, or I was about to have a kid. And so, yeah, there definitely was a feeling that something was missing. I always had creative opportunities with the job that I had, but they were limited, and I wasn't making music as much. And that, yeah, definitely there was a little bit of time there where it felt like, yeah, something was missing, and I really miss writing. Is what I came to miss about college the most. Actually, was I missed writing essays, and so that kind of, if you want to get into dissect, that's kind of where it started.
Well, you also came across the Serial podcast, right? That was like the first episodic podcast, a lot, myself included, a lot of us came across, and it kind of got us thinking, us creators, creative types thinking about, maybe I could do something kind of like this.
That first season of Serial is a landmark in podcast history, to say the least. Probably the most important podcast season ever at this point, I think, because it was a watershed moment for the format, and a lot of people discovered podcasts through that season of Serial, and it was really well done. The limitations of an audio storytelling, you know, or the perceived limitations of storytelling through audio. I think they broke a lot of ground there, and really proved that you can create captivating, serialized, long form content with just audio. And it was super compelling, just as compelling as watching a TV show. Yeah, just like a lot of people, I fell in love not only with that show, but also the possibilities of the format. And like me, anything that I take a liking to, I'm always like, oh, what if I did that? What would my version of that be? Like I just can't help myself. Anything that I end up liking creatively, like I can't help but start to formulate like what would my version of that thing be. Um, Good.
You had a problem. You didn't like the sound of your voice.
Oh yeah, still don't. But like, I mean, he does.
How are you going to navigate that with a podcast?
That was definitely like one of the initial mental hurdles. Like I think anyone that's tried podcast, like it's a big mind fuck. Having to hear your voice over and over, like anyone that doesn't do it often will hear their voice on video or whatever and be like, that's what I sound like. Like everyone has a imagine that, like cutting hours of audio to make a show is like an existential crisis. It's like,
So word on the street is you didn't think about it very much. You just started like, putting it together. I guess you wrote your first episode and went into your closet, recorded it. Is that how it went down?
yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah, pretty much. I mean, the story I always tell is like, I think it's kind of important because it's just you just never know how things come together in like a
Mhm.
way that you just would never predict. Because Dissect ends up representing everything that I've ever done in my life into one thing. Told me like 5 years before I started the podcast, like you would be a successful podcaster one day. I'd probably say, "What's podcasting?"
So long.
But even if I knew what podcasting was, but like, how is that ever possible? Like, I can't even imagine what that looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, a couple of things all happened at once, which I could kind of try to briefly explain. So, yeah, the biggest thing was I was having my first child, and so that's obviously changes your life more than anything. But I just remember one of like I said, I have a terrible memory, but one of my most vivid memories is bringing my daughter home from the hospital the first day, and Kendrick Lamar's album "To Pimp a Butterfly" coming out the day after, the day we got home from the hospital. Kendrick Lamar had released this. What I was hearing was this fantastic album. So I put on headphones, was listening to the album while holding my daughter in her nursery while she slept. And it was like in the morning, super early, obviously, in the morning, because this the sleeping hours were regulated at that point. And so there's like sunrise coming through the window, like very picture perfect moment. Hearing this album for the first time, holding my newborn daughter in my arms for the first time, or at the house essentially, and just having this like really really beautiful experience with the music and the emotions of your child being home, and that experience stuck with me. The album stuck with me, um, and I kept listening to it, and I was like, "This is just fantastic! Like it is incredible music." But then also, I just knew that there was stuff being talked about. There was a story that I didn't understand. There's certain lines or issues or concepts that I like. What is that? Like, what is he? What is he talking about there? And I just kept listening to it, and I just became more and more curious about what he was saying. And that's when the kind of light bulb went in my head and was like, I want to learn more about this album. What if I studied it in the way that I used to study music in college? And that became the premise for what became Dissect, was that initial idea of like, what if I took this album as seriously as I used to take Beethoven or Shostakovich in college?
Thank you so much for watching. Just FYI, we post a new video almost every day, so make sure you comment and subscribe below so you don't miss out on anything. And if you enjoyed this video, I think you're really going to love this one as well. And if you ever want to see a playlist of all of my podcasts or all of the plot twists or any other category of videos, you can find links to those in the description below.